10 of the Odyssey. A husband for Penelope. On the night that Odysseus told his adventures to King Alcinous, his queen Penelope was also awake, working at her loom in the moonlit window of Pellicata Palace. She, too, was weary after years of sleeplessness. All those lonely nights spent unpicking the thread she had woven during the day. She was determined that the veil must never be finished. The suitors had begun to wonder, years before, why the veil was so long in the weaving. Most thought that some magic force must be unraveling the work to spite them. But two were not superstitious at all. They kept a watch on Penelope while she worked, waiting to catch her out unthreading when she should be threading. They were baffled. Now a new idea came to them. If Penelope had not been so weary, nodding over her moonlit work, she might have heard their clumsy footsteps on the stairs and their creeping in at the door. Suddenly they burst into the room and picked up the loom and pitched it through the wide window. "You are found out, madame. Your deceit is uncovered. Who'd have thought it? You're as cunning as that dead husband of yours, the wily old Odysseus. Well, the game's over. The veil's finished. Today's the day you'll choose a husband, lady, so you'd best take a close look at each of us. Choose me, and I won't tell the others what a sly deceiver the Queen Penelope is." "But I will," said his companion peevishly. "I mean to have her before you," and they went away arguing and bickering. "Do your worst," called Penelope after them. "I am Penelope, daughter of Icarius and wife of Odysseus. How could I agree to marry any of you? Not one of you would make so much as a fit sheath for Odysseus's sword." The word quickly spread of Penelope's ruse, and the suitors emptied the larders in preparation for one last magnificent feast at which the marriage would be settled once and for all. When Odysseus woke, lying on the heap of embroidered garments, he could not for a moment remember where he was. The shape of the mountain which towered over him was somehow familiar. Mount Neriton! He was home on Ithaca, alone on a gravel foreshore, with no one to thank for his safe return and no one to greet him either. Fear shook his heart when he thought how long it had been since he learned of the suitors besieging Penelope. Could she possibly have gone on believing in him, waiting for him, fending off the advances of the ruthless princes? Surely by now she had been forced to marry. He shuddered at the thought, then quieted his beating heart and thought of a plan. Hiding the treasure given him by King Alcinous, he put on again the tattered, filthy shirt in which he had been found by Nausicaa. He dirtied his face, wrapped his head in a piece of old sacking, and climbed familiar pathways to the home of an old friend. The ancient pigman still lived in his bare, uncomfortable cave, tending the palace pigs as he had when Odysseus left for war. There were few pigs left, though the herd had once been huge. The suitors gorged themselves daily on pork and bacon. As Odysseus approached the cave, he heard the drone of voices, a young man and an old one, and his own name was mentioned more than once. "It would be different if Odysseus were here," said the old pigman. "Would it? Would it? All my life I've heard so, but Odysseus is nothing but a name to me. I don't even remember his face." "Why, lad, you only have to look in the mirror to see what Odysseus looked like. You're the picture of your father." Odysseus ripped aside the ragged curtain across the doorway of the cave. "Telemachus? Is this really Telemachus?" The young man leapt to his feet, half drawing his sword, thinking to be ambushed, as he had been ambushed before by the suitors. The pigman leapt between them. "Ah, I know that voice," he said, peering into the newcomer's face with a big winking grin. "No need for the sword, Prince Telemachus. This is an old friend of mine. He's been away traveling the world for a great many years." Odysseus winked too at the old man and said, "And now I'm shipwrecked on your beautiful island and have no means of getting home. Would you help me to a new boat, Prince Telemachus, even though I'm a stranger to you?" Telemachus gave a snort of disgust. "You certainly have been gone a long time if you don't know the state of things here on Ithaca. My word counts for nothing. After today I shall be lucky if I keep my skin. Now, if my father were here, he would give you a boat and everything you need to reach home. He's a traveler himself and must need the help of strangers." "Who? Odysseus, who fought at Troy?" said Odysseus. "Did he never come home then? Perhaps he's dead." Well, then the queen and I and Ithaca are lost. I won't believe it. Hey, your face is familiar. Have we ever met before? Odysseus put one arm across his eyes to hide his tears of joy. Not since you were a newborn baby. Not for 20 years. Not since the Trojan Wars began and every true man left his home and family and went to fight in the service of Agamemnon. Oh, you can't imagine how hard it was to leave my wife and baby, or the trouble I've had in returning to them. Come here, son, and let me look at you. I am your father, Odysseus. I have come home at last. Telemachus left the pigman's cave before Odysseus and returned to the palace just as if nothing had happened. He said nothing to his mother, nothing to the suitors who jeered at him as he came in and jostled him with their elbows. The feast was all ready, at which Penelope must choose her new husband. The suitors no longer tried to please or flatter her. She was now simply a prize one of them would win, and the wedding simply an excuse to eat and drink all they could lay hands on. The suitors hooted and laughed and drank so much that no one noticed a threadbare beggar creep into the yard and sit down by the door. No one, that is, but a big old dog lying out in the last heat of the sun. Its ribs were bruised by kicks from the suitors, and it swayed unsteadily on painful hips. But at last it reached the beggar and snuffed up his many smells. And then it laid its head in the beggar's lap, and its tail thumped the ground 3 times. So, you remember me, do you, Argos, my faithful old friend? Said the beggar. You remember how we used to go out hunting together when you were just a silly young puppy? We've had a hard life since then, you and I. What a lot of things we could tell each other, huh, old boy? And he fondled the dog's ears until the faithful creature's heart burst with joy, and he died in the beggar's lap. After a few minutes, the beggar lifted the shaggy head aside and entered the hall, bowing and creeping most humbly. He knelt beside each chair in turn. Spare me a little meat from your plate, sir, he said. Get outside with the other animals. Spare me a sip of wine from your cup, sir. What? Drink from it after? I'd catch something. Get away. Spare me that crust of bread in your fist, sir. I'll spare it, yes, said the suitor, and he threw it in the beggar's face, then hurled apples and lemons against his back as he crept away. Spare me a bite to eat, lady, and I'll remember you in my prayers. Here, sir, you may have my dinner and my wine, said Penelope. It would choke me to eat in the company of these uncharitable dogs. Here, sit in my chair and rest yourself. I pray that somewhere someone has meat and drink to spare for my dear husband. She rose to leave the room, but when the suitors caught sight of her, they set up a roaring. Where are you going? You can't go yet. You've not chosen. Choose, choose, or shall we choose for you? Tomorrow you'll be sitting down to dinner alone with your new husband. White-faced, Penelope silenced them with a glance of her piercing eyes. She drew herself up to her full height and seemed about to refuse marriage one last time. Yes, choose, mother, cried Telemachus, jumping to his feet. It's time you did. Obviously my father is dead. How could anyone spend 10 years coming home? Choose, mother. I was once heir to Ithaca, but I don't care anymore. Let one of these noble gentlemen have the crown and his sons after him. Well said, boy, crowed the suitors. At last he's grown up. Queen Penelope was dumbstruck. My own son tells me this. Well, then I give up, she added bitterly. Since you think I should give myself away into the hands of these men, Telemachus, perhaps you should choose which one I marry. Let them compete, said Telemachus quickly. Since your first husband was a man skilled with weapons, why don't you marry the one who can match Odysseus in skill? Look, there's father's bow still hanging over the fire. Marry the man who can string it and shoot an arrow and hit a target of your choosing. Forlorn, desolate, and betrayed, Penelope searched about for the most difficult target she could name. Each suitor carried a cleaver or axe swimming from his belt by a leather loop. Set your axe's head down on the table, and let the man who strings the bow and fires an arrow through the belt loops make me his wife tomorrow morning." And she swept out of the hall and went to her bedroom. With a drunken cheer, the suitors swept the dishes off the table and kicked aside the beggar who was sitting in the queen's seat. They slammed down their axes and they clawed the bow off the wall, the great hunting bow of young King Odysseus. One by one they strained to bend it so as to slide the string's loop into the cleft at the tip of the bow. They grunted and struggled. They swore and they failed. Each man that gave up threw the bow away from him in disgust. "It's impossible. It's gone stiff with age. It would take the strength of 3 men to bend it." "Let me try," said the beggar, who had sat silently all this while. You piece of dirt." Again they showered him with fruit and kicks. "Let him try," said Telemachus, scornfully tossing the bow at the beggar's head. The tattered man stood up, not a tall man, but broad-shouldered and stocky. He leaned the bow across one thigh and braced it behind the other ankle, then slipped the string loop into its cleft. The bow was strung. Blustering with rage, one of the suitors snatched it away. "Well, let's get on with the contest then. Me first." The axes tumbled, the arrows shied left and right until the walls of the hall bristled. They were failing. They were furious at failing. They were wild with disappointment. They hated one another in case one at long last succeeded. They threatened Telemachus with clenched fists because he dared to laugh at their miserable efforts. The beggar did not laugh. He waited until the bow was thrown aside by the last unsuccessful suitor. All the axes were standing. He took aim through the dozen leather loops and fired. The arrow plunged through the loops as straight as light through the iris of the eye and pierced a suitor in the heart. After that, the beggar leapt onto the middle of the table amid the forest of axes. His head and chest were bare, his gray hair curled to his shoulders. "I am Odysseus, home from the wars of Troy, and you are the ants I found in my larder, the rats I found in my cellar. Penelope will marry none of you. She has a husband already, as you will soon regret." He loosed a dozen arrows. Every one found its target. His son leapt up beside him with 2 swords, and back to back they fought. Against boy and against beggar, the suitors had been brave enough. Against Odysseus and the heir to his crown, they fell into a panic and squealed and stampeded like men transformed by magic into pigs. But there was no escape. An hour later, the room fell silent. Every suitor lay dead. Telemachus sat down in the middle of the table to catch his breath, but Odysseus touched him shyly on the shoulder and pointed in the direction of Penelope's room. "You go and tell her I'm home. I don't know how." Telemachus went and told her. When Penelope came to the head of the stairs, her face was unsmiling. She bowed her head to Odysseus and waved him towards a chair. "You must be weary, sir, after all your traveling. I am most grateful to you for ridding the palace of those wasters." And she waved her hand about her at the pile of dead bodies. "I shall prepare a bed for you." It was Odysseus's turn to be dumbstruck. So cold a welcome after 20 years? Well, perhaps he was not the handsome husband she had sent away to war. Perhaps he was a disappointment to her. "Could I not sleep in my own bed?" he asked timidly. "Very well. I shall have it carried to the west room. You will be comfortable there." Odysseus clapped his hands. "Now I understand. You are testing me, lady. My bed is carved out of the strongest branch of the tree which stands in the center of this house and which holds up its roof. How could it be moved to the west room?" And then Penelope leapt across the dead suitors on the floor and kissed her husband and held him close. "After so long, I had to test you. I didn't dare to believe my own eyes. I expected to see an old man worn out by struggles and hardships, but you're just as handsome as the day you left Ithaca." In the fields of the three-island kingdom, the farmers danced. On the slopes of Mount Neriton, the goatherds played their squawking pipes. Throughout Ithaca and Cephalonia and wooded Xanthe, beacon fires were lit and drums were beaten from morning till night to say that King Odysseus was home at last. In the peaceful days that followed, poets wrote down the griefs and triumphs of the Odyssey. But Odysseus would not hear the poems recited nor the songs sung until he had made sacrifice to Poseidon and struck a peace between man and God, between sea and land, between heaven and earth. The end.